Good morning, all. Today we are going to learn about new economic reforms or new economic policy. During 1991, our country was in an acute economic crisis. So, in order to revive our country from this crisis, the government of India has introduced many reforms, and all these reforms, which were introduced after 91, are called economic reforms. So, we have already learned about IPR 1991. It is an important aspect of this economic reforms. This economic reforms was introduced by the Narasimha Rao government. That is, Narasimha Rao government came into power during June 1991, and this all the reforms introduced after July 1991 are called economic reforms. Actually, during the previous government, that is during Rajiv Gandhi government itself, government has understood that our economic situation is not good, and so the government was thinking of coming up with some reforms. But during that time, it didn't happen. But during the late 90s, our situation was very bad, and so the government was forced to come up with some reforms. Okay. Before 1991, the public sector had been given a very important role in economic development, and the private sector was under rigorous controls. But the government understood that the public sector was inefficient because of many reasons like bureaucracy, red tapeism, overstaffing in the public sector companies. Then there was a lack of initiative in the public sector. All these issues, as a result of all these issues, there was a huge economic crisis in India in the year 1991. So, new economic policy refers to all those different economic reforms introduced since July 1991, or policy measures and changes which aim at increasing productivity and efficiency by creating an environment of competition in the economy. So, new economic policy was aiming at increasing the productivity and efficiency. How? By creating a competitive environment. Okay, that is, until then, government was controlling everything. But then it realized that by controlling the economy or controlling the market, it is not going to succeed, or it is not going to achieve economic development. Rather, the government should believe in the market forces, or it should understand that the market forces can control the economic and can control the market by itself. Okay, that was the realization that government has made. So because of that, government started liberalizing our economy. Okay, so the main components of new economic reforms were liberalization, privatization, and globalization, which we call together as LPG. Okay, so actually, it was the finance minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. He was the brain behind all the reforms. Okay, and so we should say that we should be thankful to him for all the reforms that were brought by him during that period. It is because of those reforms that Indian economy was able to grow to such a great extent. So the key terms or key components of economic reforms are liberalization, privatization, and globalization. We have already mentioned that IPR 1991 is a very important aspect of new economic reforms. So now let's see what triggered new economic reforms, or uh, what was the need for new economic reform. The immediate factor that triggered economic reforms was a severe balance of payment crisis. Okay, so there was a severe balance of payment crisis during 1991. Actually, the initial signs of this balance of payment crisis was clear in late 1990 itself. That is when the foreign exchange reserves began to fall. Okay, so before going into details of this, first of all, what do you mean by balance of payment crisis? Balance of payment means the difference between the money that is flowing into a country and the money that is flowing out of a country. Okay, That is the difference between money, the foreign currency that is coming into the country, and the foreign currency that is going out of the that is the outflow of money from a country. Okay, so during that period of time, what happened was the money that was flowing out of the country was more than the money that was flowing into the country. Okay, so that is why we said there was a severe balance of payment crisis during that particular point of time. Okay, so that was one of the main reasons, or that actually triggered the introduction of economic reforms in our country. And as we said, during late 1990s itself, this issue was clear because our foreign exchange reserves was going down. Foreign exchange reserve means the asset held by the Reserve Bank in foreign currency. Okay, these reserves are used to pay back the liabilities and all. Okay, so this foreign exchange reserve was going down during late 1990. That is, at that time there was a Gulf War. Okay, and due to Gulf War, the oil prices were going up. And not only that, during that time, many of the Indians who were working in Gulf region, they were losing their job. Okay, this actually accelerated the issue, and they were coming back to India. And because of that, what happened? The fund that we were getting from them, okay, the fund that we were getting from non-resident Indians, and that will be in foreign currency only, that we started losing that fund, or we started actually this fund, the amount that we were getting was reduced. That was a huge issue, or that actually contributed to the all the crises that our economy was facing. Thus the outflow of money, or sorry, thus the inflow of money reduced, and the outflow of money was increasing because of the rise in oil prices and all. So that is how the balance of payment crisis occurred. Okay, so when this happened, that is when the foreign exchange reserves was going down, what the government did was government tried to start they it actually tried to restrict the import of goods. So the thought was that when the import of goods is restricted, the the money outflow will be reduced. That was the thought. But what happened was this actually had a negative impact. It actually had a very bad impact on the growth of our economy. Okay, so then the government realized this is not going to work. So it started reducing the restrictions, or it started realizing that this regulations are not a solution for our economic crisis. Okay, so government started introducing new economic policy. So one issue, or the trigger for introduction of economic policy is unfavorable balance of payment, that we already have discussed. Then Gulf crisis, that also we have discussed. Then the foreign exchange reserve, fall in foreign exchange reserve, that also I've mentioned. Then the one point that I missed out is fiscal deficit. So what do you mean by fiscal deficit? Okay, fiscal deficit means the difference between the government expenditure and government revenue. The difference between government revenue, or government income, and government expenditure. It is a gap between the income and spending of a government. Okay, so our fiscal deficit was another major issue. That is, the government was spending more than what it was getting. And so what happened? In order to adjust this, in order to compensate this, government had to take loans. And during late 1990 91 and all, what happened was the government was paying a huge amount as interest on the loans it has already taken. It is around 36% of the expenditure, government expenditure, was interest payment. Okay, so that is a huge amount, so government was no more able to afford it. That was another reason for the implementation of new economic reforms. Then another point is rise in prices. That is, in India, the prices continued to rise very high. Okay, the prices was going so high, and this inflation rate was too high, in spite of the fact that there was good monsoon during that time. Okay, even after that, what happened? The price of food grains was very high. Okay, so that shows how much inflation was there, or how the prices were rising at that point of time. So this was also having a negative impact on our economy. Okay, so government thought of new economic policy. The last reason is poor performance of public sector undertakings. Public sector undertakings, or PSUs. Okay, initially, that is after independence, there were only a few public sector companies, but later on, the number of public sector companies increased, and a huge public fund was spent or invested in these public sector units. And initial years, during the initial years, most of the public sector units were making profit, but later on, most of them started making losses. And because of this poor performance from the public sector companies, uh, they became a huge liability for the government. And so, in such a situation, it was essential to come up with the new economic reforms and to shift the importance from the public sector units to the private sector. Okay, from public sector, the importance of or the role of this public sector units in economic development was shifted to private sector. Okay, so these are the main reasons for the introduction of public, new economic reforms or new economic policy. As we have already discussed, the main features or components of new economic policy are liberalization, privatization, and globalization. First, we'll see what is liberalization. Liberalization means to reduce unnecessary restrictions and controls on business units imposed by government. That is, before 1991, there were so many restrictions on businesses. Okay, that is, there was the businesses had to go through a long procedure. Actually, the process was very tedious for them. That is, if they want to start a business, or if they want to make any small changes, or for even for the routine things, they had to go through uh, tedious procedures. Okay, that was actually causing disturbance or irritation to the business people or business houses. So such procedures were simplified. Then, before 1991, government has been imposing several restrictions or several controls on Indian economy, like industry licensing, then price control, import license, foreign exchange control, restrictions on investment by big business houses, so many restrictions like that. Okay, so business was being restricted, or the private sector was being restricted and regulated by government. Then the government understood that such restrictions are causing negative impacts on the economy. So uh, they thought that it's like these kind of restrictions or these kind of control is actually uh, affecting the entrepreneurs in a very negative manner. That is, their enthusiasm is being reduced by such tedious procedures and all. Just think, if a person wants to start a business and he is forced to go through a very long procedure, naturally his enthusiasm will go down, right? Because he may be thinking like, I'm wasting my time and effort on unnecessary things, like unproductive things. So that's how these administrative hurdles are affecting business people. So government realized it, and so it actually came up with better or much more simpler procedures. Okay, so uh, such controls, another issue was that these kind of controls was giving rise to corruption also. A lot of corruption, then a lot of delay and inefficiency. All these were caused by the unwanted the procedures and rules and all. Okay, so government came with the economic reforms. Okay, so economic reforms were based on the assumption that market forces could guide the economy in a more effective manner than government control. Okay, actually, in front of India, there were examples for this. That is, some underdeveloped countries like Singapore or Korea, they're all attaining rapid economic growth through liberalization. So seeing this, Indian government also thought, okay, that this is the better option. So that's how India also decided to liberalize its economy. Okay, so now let's see what are the measures taken for liberalization. The first one was liberalization of industrial licensing that we have already discussed. That is industrial licensing. That is before 1991, any company, if a new company, if anyone wants to start a new company, then he'll have to take a license for it. But after 1991, that is after economic reforms, the industries for which the license is to be taken was reduced to minimum. That is only for those companies where uh, which affect the national security or which are producing hazardous products. Such industries need to take license. Others are freed from such hurdles. Okay, that is about industrial licensing. Then next one is concessions from Monopolies Act, that is regarding MRTP Act, that is big business houses who were able to invest more. They were all restricted until 1991. Such firms had to obtain prior approval from government if they want to invest. Okay, that is before taking any investment decision, they had to get approval from government. Such a rule was taken off. Okay, now they are free to expand or to diversify. Such concessions, so many concessions were given to such big firms, MRTP firms. Okay, then the capital investment limit was fixed earlier. That limit also was taken away. Then there is no restriction for this kind of dominant companies or business houses for setting up new industries or for expansion, for amalgamation, or for taking over some other company. Okay, all these things were restricted before 1991, and after this economic reforms, such restrictions were removed. However, under this policy, more emphasis was laid on checking unfair trade practices. Okay, that is in order to safeguard the interest of the consumers. Fair trade needs to be ensured. Okay, that was given more priority. So that is how MRTP Act was changed. Actually, in 2002, this MRTP Act was abolished, and instead of that, a Competition Act was enacted. That is, this Competition Act is much more uh, simpler, or it doesn't have this much restrictions when compared to this MRTP Act. It doesn't have that much restrictions. Competition Act actually wants to ensure that there is no unfair trade practice happening in the country. Okay, that's all. So that is about concessions from Monopolies Act. Then third point is freedom from expansion and production to industries. That is before 1991, when the government gives license, it will fix a maximum limit for the production capacity, and no business can produce more than that particular limit. But as of now, that is after 1991, now there's no limit, sorry, licensing. So and definitely what happens now, there is no limit for this production capacity, and so the companies can make use of large scale production. And also one more thing is, the producers actually, they can only produce those goods for which the license is given. That was the condition before 1991. And now that is not there because license is not there, right? So now they can produce whatever goods that give them profit. Okay, that restriction is also removed. That is about the third point. Then the fourth point is freedom to import capital goods and raw materials. That is, after liberalization, Indian companies can buy machines or raw materials from foreign countries uh, for expansion or to modernize themselves. There is no restrictions regarding these things. Then next point is freedom to import technology. That is, under new economic policy, the emphasis was given on promoting new technology or modernization. Okay, so because the objective of this policy is to develop uh, new modern industries and all, like computers, electronics, these things were given more priority. Okay, so modernization was given importance. So under this reforms, in order to promote technological advancement, or in order to promote new technologies and all, modernization of companies and all, government has allowed agreements to import new technology or foreign technology. Okay, there was a provision in the new industrial policy, that is IPR 1991, that high priority industries need not seek any permission from government to enter into any kind of technological agreements with foreign companies and all. Okay, so for getting foreign technology, they can go for any agreement without getting permission from government. Okay, that's because modernization or technological advancement was given priority in this particular uh, policy. Okay. The next initiative is replacing FARA with FEMA. That is, earlier, for controlling the foreign exchange transactions, government had come up with an act, that is Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, FARA. Okay, this FARA is very restrictive in nature. It had so many controls over the foreign transactions. Then after 1991, the attitude has changed a lot, right? That is, from restrictions or from control, our priority has shifted to growth or development. And because of that, FERA was replaced with FEMA. FEMA means Foreign Exchange Management Act. That was introduced in the year 1999. And this FEMA is much more liberal. Okay, that is, in FERA there were uh, so many conditions, so many rules were there. Okay, it was having a very wide scope, whereas this FEMA, it's much more liberal. It doesn't control too much. It actually welcomes foreign exchange and all, I mean foreign exchange transactions and all. So that is much more liberal and welcoming in nature. And actually in FERA there were so many rules which says, I mean, violation of such rules were considered to be as criminal offenses and all. But when it came to FEMA, it became civil offense, and the punishments were also lesser. Okay, there were no imprisonment and all. In FERA, there were imprisonments for a violation, but in FEMA, only fines were there for most cases. Okay, so that is how FEMA is much more liberal than FERA. Okay, that is how it welcomes foreign exchange transactions. Then next point is liberalization of export and import transactions. That is, the government has liberalized its export import policy. Okay, that is, it has made the import of raw materials, capital goods, technology, such things were made very easy. And also, the provisions were actually very much simplified. Okay, it was now very easy to import and export things. The procedures and documents related to import and export, all such things were made more simpler. That is about liberalization of export and import transactions. The next point is liberalization in taxation policy. Before, we had very high tax rates, and such high tax rates were acting as a hindrance for economic development, because such high tax rates will definitely demotivate the business people, the entrepreneurs, because they may think like, even if I make this much profit or this much revenue, if I generate, most of that amount will go to the government as tax. So that will be a demotivation for the entrepreneurs to expand or to set up a new company. So such a demotivating factor, that is high tax rate, that was reduced. Okay, that is another move in liberalization. Then the next point is liberalization in capital market. As before 1991, the provisions regarding issue of shares, then debentures, such things were very, very restrictive. Okay, that is only big business companies, business houses can fulfill those conditions. But now, after 91, such things were simplified. liberalized. So now it is easy for a company to issue its shares, debentures, etc. And also one more point is the Indian companies were allowed to raise fund from foreign capital markets also. Okay, so these are some of the measures regarding capital market. Then the next one is liberalization in banking sector. Okay, bank is a very important aspect when you consider economic development of a country. So earlier monetary policy was very restrictive. Okay, monetary policy. This monetary policy was very restrictive. The policy regarding SLR, CRR and all, you have already learned it. So that was very restrictive in nature. Now that was also liberalized. Okay, these are some of the measures for liberalization. Then another important point is mm, the increased investment limit of small industries. That is, the investment limit of small scale industries has been raised to 5 crore. Okay, so as to enable them to introduce modernization. That is, the actually in this policy we have already mentioned about modernization. Okay, so for that what they did is, for small scale industries also modernization is very important. So for modernizing small scale industries they'll have to invest money. So if we limit the amount of if we limit the investment, then for small scale industries what happens is they won't go for modernization. For that reason government has raised the limit to 5 crore for small industries, and the investment limit for micro or tiny industries, sorry, tiny enterprises has been increased to 25 lakhs. So these are the measures for liberalization. Now let's see what are the advantages and disadvantages of liberalization. So, the first benefit of liberalization is increase in foreign investment. Because with liberalization, the inflow of foreign investment has increased. That is, now the foreign investors they consider that India is good for investment. Okay, that is, they consider India as a good investment destination. So in the last few years, or we can say after 91, there has been a huge inflow of foreign investment. Okay, that is in the form of FDI, that is foreign direct investment, or as portfolio investments. Okay, anyways, there is a lot of foreign investments in India after 1991. That is an advantage of liberalization. Then the second point is increase in foreign exchange reserves. That is, before IPR or before 1991, India was facing a acute shortage of foreign exchange that we have already mentioned. So after this after this economic reform or after liberalization, the foreign exchange reserves have improved a lot. That is because of the inflow of foreign investment, and also due to the increase in the exports. Okay, because of these two reasons our foreign exchange reserves has improved. Then the third point is increase in industrial production. That is, so many checks and controls have been removed after economic reforms. So because of all these liberalization, what happened is entrepreneurs were ready to set up more companies. Then and also the foreign entrepreneurs, they also came to India, they also started new companies in India. Okay, all these has contributed to the increase in industrial production. And also we know that the all the production limit and all the production capacity limit and all were all removed, such things. So because of these reasons production has increased. Then comes increase in competition. That is, as a result of this liberalization, the competition has increased in the market. That is, we know that now the barriers are removed, like licensing and all such barriers are removed, and more private parties are allowed to start companies in almost all industrial sectors. So and also even the MNCs or foreign companies were allowed to start units in India. So for these reasons the competition has increased, and so the customers will be benefited. Okay, because when competition increases, efficiency increases, and better products will be given to the customers at a lower price. For example, when you consider telecom industry, before 91 or earlier there was only BSNL. But later on, what happened? Many foreign and domestic players came to this particular sector. That is Reliance, Tata, Vodafone, Airtel, all Idea, all such private players are there now. So what happened? Because of all these private players, the quality has improved and the prices have reduced. Okay, so who is benefited ultimately? It is our common man, right? Because in earlier, like in my childhood and all, we had only land phones, and there was no mobile phones, or not only that, only in very few houses there will be a phone. But now that is not the case. Everyone, not only that, every house there'll be a phone. It is like each and every person has got at least one phone. Even the kids are now having phones, right? So everyone are having phones, and that too at a very minimal rate. You can make calls, you can message. So everything is just because of the high competition in the market. Okay, then next point is control over price. Before liberalization, we already mentioned that one of the reasons for economic reforms is inflation, high inflation in India. So at that point of time, there was high inflation and all prices were very high. But after economic reforms or after liberalization, this inflation rate has come down. That's because after liberalization, there was high competition, and also the production was increased, that we have already mentioned. So, because of these reasons, the prices have come down because the supply has increased. Okay, before the demand was high and supply was low. Now the supply has increased. So naturally, the uh, price will come down, and also when competition is more, efficiency will be high. So people or the business houses, they'll be working with maximum efficiency in order to reduce the cost, so they can offer products at a lesser price. Okay, then next point is check on corruption. Okay, when there was so many procedural issues and all, that is like licensing, quotas, permits, such things were there before liberalization. So business units had to go to government officials for each and everything, and for clearing these administrative hurdles, they had to bribe these government officials. Okay, so that was actually causing hindrance for the economic growth. So when such restrictions are taken off, what happened? Naturally, the corruption should come down. But that is again a question mark whether the corruption has actually come down or not. But the intention is to lower the corruption. Okay. Then next point is reduction in dependence on external commercial borrowings. One of the main reasons for bringing this economic reform was that the government was taking so much of loans to meet the balance of payment deficit, right? So uh, earlier our government was depending so much on this external commercial loans, but after liberalization, the inflow of foreign funds has increased, and this reduced the need for external commercial borrowings. Okay, so the liberalization has helped the government to reduce the debt burden. Okay, it was a big burden on government, so that was reduced. So these are some of the advantages of liberalization. Now let's see what are the disadvantages of liberalization. The first point is increase in unemployment. That is, liberalization has promoted import of capital intensive technology. Okay, that is, we already mentioned that this particular reform has promoted, or it was trying to promote modernization. It was trying to ensure that companies are using modern technology and all. When modern technology is being used, what happens? That will lower the requirement of manpower. Okay, so when capital intensive technologies are being used, that is when automation is implemented, computerization, such things will ultimately result in unemployment. Okay, that is one concept, but we can say that all such technological advancements are required. So when some people lose their job, some others will definitely benefit out of it. That is, some others will get jobs. When you are using modern technology, people of people who are skilled, people who are trained, okay, who are having good technical knowledge, such people will get job. But unskilled, untrained people, they lose job. Okay, that is increase in unemployment. Then the next point is loss to domestic units. Okay, loss to domestic units. That is, as we have mentioned, liberalization promoted competition in the economy. So, as a result, what happens? The domestic business units may be affected. That is, these business units, they may not be able to compete with MNCs, multinational companies. Okay, because such multinational companies, they'll be producing at a very large quantity, and so they may be able to sell products at a lower rate, and also they may be having a better technology, and so they may be able to produce more with better quality and lower price. In that case, our domestic units, small units, they may not be able to compete with these. They may not be able to give products though at the rate that these MNCs are giving, at such better quality they may not be able to give. In that case, what happens? These domestic units will die out. Okay. Then next point is increased dependence on foreign nations. That is, with the liberalization, we can easily import foreign goods. Okay, so we Indian consumers started using foreign goods, and now we are like common man. We are fond of such foreign products. Okay, so what happens? Again, our domestic units will be affected. Okay, another thing is, because of this liberal import policy, uh, technology is also imported easily. So what happens? Our Indian business units, they will stop using and developing indigenous technology. That is technology that is being developed in our own place. Okay, they'll stop it because it is much easier to import technology from foreign countries. If you want to develop your own technology, you'll need more effort and money. Okay, so it is always, they'll think it is always better to import technology from other countries. This can adversely affect our nation because we ultimately are depending on foreign nations. Okay, so we are depending on foreign goods, we are depending on foreign technology. So what happens? Ultimately, our growth is being hindered. Okay, then next point is unbalanced development. That is, most of the MNCs, when they came to India, they actually focused on high income groups. Okay, they didn't try to provide products or services for lower income groups. And as a result, what happened? The living standards of high income group increased or improved, whereas there was no change regarding the living standards of the lower income groups. And as a result, the gap increased. The gap between the living standard of high income group and low income group increased, or we can say the inequalities increased. Okay, so there was an unbalanced development. Okay, then the next point is increase in regional imbalance. That is, the private sector companies as well as foreign companies, when they wanted to establish a firm, establish a company, they definitely went to developed regions. Okay, already developed regions, because they wanted to get best infrastructure facilities. Okay, and so they never went to any backward regions. Okay, and as a result, these backward regions, there was no development in such backward regions, and already developed areas, they developed further. Again, there was regional imbalance, or the regional imbalance increased due to this liberalization. So these are some of the advantages and disadvantages of liberalization. Then next is privatization. That is, transferring of public sector industries to private sector is called privatization. According to Dr. A. Peter, privatization is the transfer of functions or activities or organization from public sector to private sector. Okay, so it is transfer of functions or activities or organization from public sector to private sector. So that means privatization doesn't mean the transfer of ownership, only the transfer of ownership. That actually we all have thought that it is considered as privatization only when the ownership is being transferred from public sector to private sector. That is not the case. Actually, in privatization, this ownership change is there. Even if there is no ownership change, still there it can be privatization. How? That is when the management, or when a particular public enterprise, its management is being transferred from public sector to private sector. That can also be considered as privatization. Okay, even when the private enterprises which are managed and operated by private sector, that also can be considered as privatization. Is that clear? So, what is privatization? Privatization means allowing private sector to set up more and more industries which were previously reserved for public sector. So we know that some of the industrial sectors were reserved for public sector enterprises or public sector units. Okay, so such sectors were opened for private sector in 1991. Okay, that is a major initiative for privatization. Then another thing is existing enterprises of public sector which were wholly or partially sold to private sector. That is until 1991, some of the major public sector units which were under government or under public sector was transferred or was sold to the private sector. Okay, that is the shares of such PSUs were sold, and so the private people or private individuals as well as private companies were allowed to own our public sector units either fully or partially. That is also privatization, part of privatization. So as a result, the importance of private sector increased, or the role of private sector in the economic development of the country increased. So that is about privatization. Then the measures adopted for privatization, or if you're asked to write about privatization in India, then you have to write all these points. Okay. The first point is contraction of public sector. That is, there were number of industries reserved for public sector before 1991, and after 1991 these industries were opened for private sector. Okay, only a very few industries were reserved for public sector. Rest of the industries were opened for the private sector to invest. Okay, that is private sector. Private individuals and private companies can start companies or firms in such industries, such sectors. Okay, they were all open for private sector. Then next point is sale of shares of public sector to private sector. That is, the share of public sector units were sold to foreign investors, then mutual funds, public, then workers of those PSUs. Okay, so in such a manner, the shares of the public sector units were sold to private parties. In some PSUs, even 100% shares were disinvested. Okay, this is called disinvestment. That is, the government is disinvesting. It is selling the shares to others or public and getting back the money. Okay, so in this way, even 100% shares of some public sector units were sold out to the to private parties. Okay, then next point is sick public sector units. That is, sick public sector units were forwarded to Board for Reconstruction of Public Sector Enterprises. Okay, and in some cases, some companies which are very much sick and it cannot be revived, such PSUs were sold to private sector. Then the next point is National Renewal Fund. National Renewal Fund was established for protecting the interest of employees on account of privatization. Okay, that is all the employees of public sector units which were sold to private sector cannot be absorbed by the private sector. Okay, when a particular company is sold to a private party, in most cases they may not be taking all the employees. Some of the employees will lose their job. In such a case, they should be protected, right? For that, this particular fund was introduced. This fund is even used for payment of compensation and for providing security, social security measures to the retrenched employees. Okay, those employees who lost their job due to this privatization. They'll be paid a compensation and they'll be given social security measures through this particular fund, and they'll be paid using this fund. They'll be paid for the voluntary retirement payment. When you take voluntary retirement, you'll be getting some amount, right? That amount you'll get from this national renewal fund. So this particular decision was taken for protecting the interest of retrenched employees due to privatization. The next point is increase in private sector investment in plans. That is, in 5-year plans, the share of private sector investment has been increased. Okay, that is, as we have already mentioned, the role of private sector in economic development was made more significant. So naturally, their investment will also be increased in the plans, 5-year plans. Okay. Then the next point is withdrawal of convertibility clause of loans into shares. I have already discussed this while discussing IPR 1991. That is, before 1991, if a financial institution give a loan to a private company and the company is not able to pay back the amount, the principal amount as well as the interest, then the remaining amount will be, that is on time, if it is not able to pay back, then the remaining amount which it owes to the financial institution will be converted as shares. And so what happens, the part of the ownership of the private company will go to the financial institution. Okay, this clause, this is called as convertibility clause. This clause was withdrawn. Okay. Then next point is implementation of recommendations of Rangarajan committee. This Rangarajan committee was appointed for giving instructions or for giving recommendations for improving the functioning of PSUs, public sector units. Okay, so Rangarajan committee has come up with some recommendations regarding disinvestment, then issue of shares, then running PSUs as corporate bodies, etc. So such recommendations were implemented. Okay. These are some of the measures adopted for privatization in India. So with this we come to the end of this session. So in this video lecture we have discussed about liberalization and privatization, which are two key components of new economic reforms. In our next class we'll discuss about globalization. Thank you.